Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ronan, and I'm here today to introduce our webinar. It's the second part of our mobile webinar series. As I said yesterday, if you're in attendance, usually Dara presents these webinars, but he's actually on leave, so I'm stepping in. And you might recognize my voice, but you might recognize my face if you are on Test Huddle, because I'm usually there. I'm the community manager of Test Huddle, and we'll talk about a bit about the discussion for this webinar more on Test Huddle later. So just to introduce our speaker today, Stephen Janaway is going to be speaking. He's works for the Net-a-Porter Group based in the UK, and the title of his webinar today is Mobile Tester, Your Place in the Team. The webinar will last up to an hour today, and afterwards we're going to take one or two questions live in the webinar, and then following that we're going to move the discussion over to testhuddle.com. So if you're not a member of Test Huddle, just head over there now and you can pop open a new window and you can register and sign up while this webinar is on. If you are a member, just pop open a new window and sign in, and the first thing you'll see is the discussion for this webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Stephen here, and he's going to present now. So over to you, Stephen.
Right, hi everyone. Let me just press play on this. So hopefully you can all see that. I'm sure Ronan will tell me if you can't. So this is my webinar. It's called the Mobile Tester, Your Place on the Team, and it's about how you can become a valuable mobile team member. So hopefully by the time you've heard me speak here, you will have picked up some really good hints and some tips on how to be a really valuable team member. And as Ronan said, head over to Test Huddle afterwards, and I'll be around to answer some questions. I put a thread up in Test Huddle, so just post your question there, and I'll be able to then give you a response back through that forum. So let's get started. So I've been working in mobile for around about 15 years for companies like Nokia and Ericsson and Motorola, and as Ronan mentioned, I currently work for the Net-a-Porter Group, luxury e-commerce retailer, and I run a team for Net-a-Porter who work with social commerce, so a social commerce application, a shoppable social network. And when I'm not doing this, I also do a podcast called Testing in the Pub with my friend Dan Ashby. And so if you like listening to people talk about testing, sometimes we interview famous people in the world of testing as well, then you can pick our podcast up from testinginthepub.com, or if you search for Testing in the Pub on iTunes, you'll also find us there. So, what are we going to talk about today? So, firstly, I'm going to talk about whether this is even important in the first place. So is mobile testing and the mobile tester in a team important? Quite frequently, people ask me whether mobile testing is actually different. Should we be differentiating mobile testing from any other sort of testing? I think it is, so I'm going to explain why I think it is different. And then the bulk of the webinar is about what actually makes a great mobile tester. So what makes you great if you're testing mobile? What secures your place on the team? So why is this all important anyway? Well, if you're anything like me, your smartphone has probably got a large number of apps on it, and it's probably holding a huge amount of data on you. And certainly I expect applications to be fast, I expect them to be reliable, I expect them to be easy to use. And it seems from surveys that I've read that a lot of mobile users are the same. So I saw one statistic saying that 80% of users delete applications after using them for the first time, particularly if there's anything wrong with them. And even if they don't do this, they're able to leave feedback very quickly and very easily within mobile application stores, like the App Store or Google Play, for example, and that can reflect very badly on a brand. And so quality, particularly in mobile, I think is extremely important. But this might surprise you. and I kind of dug into it, as a mobile tester on the team, maybe you actually aren't in the team at all, because mobile projects quite often don't have testers. So particularly take Android, for example, there's very much a release and then fix it later culture, because it's so quick and easy to release applications into the Play Store. There's lots of small companies, lots of design agencies who are also involved within mobile, and traditionally they don't tend to have testers in either. And I do tend to see an everyone can test mobile mentality quite often. People think that because they're able to use a mobile, they're quite effective at actually then being able to test. But as testers, we really need to be getting into these teams. We need to be thinking about what we can do to improve mobile app quality, and we do that by being valuable and showing our value. Because, kind of like it or not, the flip side of this, the other side, is maybe soon most of us are going to be mobile testers. So mobile is becoming huge. Well, it is huge. It's becoming even bigger. Year on year, the sales of mobile devices go up and up and up. And the ways that we as humans use mobile devices just increase and increase. So more and more industries are moving into mobile. So perhaps most of us are going to soon be mobile testers. If we look at the platforms here, I mean, what happens recently is the number of mobile cellular subscriptions went past the number of people on the planet. So there are now more mobile cellular subscriptions, we think, than there are actually people alive. And I mean, a lot of these are SIMs talking machine to machine. We reckon there's probably around about half the population has a mobile subscription. That's still a huge number, and that's way, way more than, say, the number of TV sets or the number of PCs or landlines or satellite accounts. The way people watch TV is changing, for example, because of mobile. And mobiles are being used increasingly as the default way to get online as well. So take, for example, the industry that I work in retail. We're very, very mobile focused because every year we see more and more of our customers shopping using mobile devices versus shopping using, say, more traditional computers, desktops and laptops. And this year I think we're really beginning to see an explosion in wearables as well. So pretty soon we could all be mobile testers, and it can be quite daunting when you start to work in mobile for the first time. There could be a lot to learn, and I think the first thing I would say, if you're thinking about your value to the team, is don't be scared. Don't be scared by mobile. Think about what you already know, because the key thing is a lot from a testing perspective with mobile is the same. So you can reuse a lot of your existing skill set. Mobile testing is testing, but it's testing in a mobile context. And so, for example, if you have an expertise in functional testing, that easily carries over to the mobile context. So being able to test how a particular application works from a functional perspective, just as valid in mobile as it is anywhere else. And it's the same with non-functional testing, thinking about things like performance and stress and load. There's just as big an impact on mobile. Sure, the tool set may be different, but the testing you do and the mindset you need is exactly the same. And the mindset that you generally have as a tester is equally applicable, and you really need to carry that over. So as testers, we need to be great at asking questions. We definitely need to be great at asking questions in a mobile context. Discovering information, another key testing skill, equally applicable. You definitely need to be doing this irrespective of what you're testing. And then when you find things, that communication, how you communicate within a team, is extremely valuable, and you secure your value as a team member and your place on the team by how well you can ask questions of the software, discover that information, and then communicate that. And it's that exploration and that understanding that you get that is incredibly valuable. So to be a great mobile tester and to secure your place on the team, you need to understand these, you need to carry over your existing skill set, but then also you need to understand what's different. So understanding what's different and unique about testing mobile is really where your value can lie. So let's look at some of the differences. So within mobile, projects can be extremely quick and quicker than maybe in other more traditional industries, from a few weeks to a few months, for example. You may well be in a smaller team, you may work closer with design, and usability for mobile also is extremely important. It's quite possible you're not sat at your desk all day, and I'll explain in a minute why that's a good thing. And it's not just because you've got up to make a cup of tea. And with mobile, the hardware influences the software far more than in some other, say, like the web application space, for example. The influence of hardware on software in the mobile space is far, far greater. So your understanding of the hardware needs to be far, far better. And one really, really unique piece, which I think we can really leverage as testers in mobile, is becoming customer advocates. So really understanding the customers. There's lots of different customers for a mobile application. They're normally very geographically distributed. And you can bring real value to your team by being that customer advocate. So let's look at these in a little bit more detail. So let's start with the first one. So projects are quick. They can typically take weeks, maybe a few months maximum. And you're going to need to adapt your testing approach to suit this. So you really need to be considering exploratory approaches to your mobile testing. The more traditional way of writing test cases in advance based on requirement documents and then running those test cases and reporting the progress, that doesn't fit with the speed that a typical mobile project requires and the flexibility required. You need to consider your context. So are you testing a banking application, for example? You'll want to be really drilling down on the security aspects. You might want to think about things like proxies and different attack vectors and understanding about things like OWASP. But if you're testing a mobile game, you want to be looking at things that are very different, and you want to be very extremely quality focused with a mobile game. Most mobile games make most of their revenue in the first few weeks. If there's something wrong with the game in the first few weeks, users just won't use it, and your whole revenue model is dead. You want to understand where, for example, your application is launching. Who are the target users for that application? Lots of different questions to ask that help you establish the context that you're working within. And don't expect requirements and requirement documents to have all the answers. I mean, this is generally true, I think, for no matter where you work as a tester, but particularly within mobile. Don't expect requirements to have all the answers. But this does give you the one way that you can actually solve this particular problem. And one way I like working within mobile is it gives you the opportunity to work closer with design. So if you've got UX or design people where you work, go and make friends with them. Go and understand them better. Buy them some coffee or something. Offer to help them and get involved with them and involved in the software development process much earlier than perhaps you normally would. This can mean you might be reviewing wireframes, documents that explain the logical UI flow through an application. Essentially, you might be static testing those wireframes and giving your input into that. Maybe you pair up with the designers as they design the particular UI. Look at things like how usable is that particular UI. Maybe you play a part in prototyping that UI on paper, for example. You want to understand the UI language, so you want to understand the language of flick and pinch and zoom and tap and many others. You want to be able to speak that UI language. And the reason you want to do all of this is because usability within mobile is extremely important. As a tester, we need to be looking for how usable a mobile application is. And it's far more important because, for one thing, the screen on a mobile is far smaller, so how you interact with a mobile is different. Typically, you're interacting one-handed, and a user may be using a mobile in less than perfect light, for example, maybe outside in direct sunlight. So you'll be wanting to focus on ease of use of the application, If it's one of those applications, and I'm sure you've used these before, where you pick it up and without really needing any sort of tool tip or anything like that, you just know how to use it and your thumb just naturally falls in the right place, that's a really well-designed application. We need to be looking for stuff like that. How's the look and feel? Is it consistent with the desktop, for example, to give the user a feeling of familiarity? And does the application or the device feel fast? So it's not sitting there constantly spinning wait notes and stuff like that. All of this really important. And you, as a tester, you want to understand how the user actually uses the device. So we believe at the moment that people are still mostly using their devices one-handed with their thumb, although this is changing with the rise of phablets and much larger screens. So understand how users will use your app and test like them. Impersonate them if you have to. And good mobile testing doesn't always take place in the office because that's not where your users are, and the network conditions and the light in your office are not indicative of where your users are. So as a good mobile tester, sometimes you can provide value to your team by leaving the team and actually getting out and about and going where your users are. So maybe thinking about busy areas, train stations are absolutely ideal, and actually testing on trains as trains move very quickly through different network cells, then the quality of the network can change very rapidly. They're a great place for testing. And you'll want to be looking for those spots that you know around near your office where there isn't any mobile reception. And you'll be wanting to look at how the application performs in those particular cases. As a good mobile tester, you're also using the latest devices and you understand those devices, but then you also understand the older ones as well and some in between. So a subset that's indicative of the devices that your users will be using. So you'll need to understand the market, read the tech blogs, get really immersed in what you're actually doing. I mean, this is consumer electronics, mobile, ultimately. It's a very fast-paced, hardware-driven, from a device perspective, industry. And to be a great mobile tester, and to be a great mobile tester on a team, you need to get really excited by mobile. You need to get really excited by when those new devices are coming out and what new features they got, and really spreading that information and that positivity through the team. And you want to understand how complicated these devices are as well. I mean, this guy here is holding all the 1980s tech that you now find in a modern smartphone. So he looks pretty cool, doesn't he? So you want to understand how complicated the devices are. You want to understand, for example, when your application's running, your phone is doing a lot of different things in terms of communicating with the network, and maybe other applications are updating in the background. This means really thinking of really complicated test scenarios. And it also means not just testing on a fresh install, because your users don't have a fresh install. They've got loads of other apps running at the same time. And there could be an impact between those different apps. There could be some kind of race conditions between those apps. It's another example of how you understand your user. Because really, you provide value by being a customer advocate for your team. So you provide value by understanding your users, because there's lots of different users in lots of different places. And a lot of them are very different. 7.2 billion people in the world. We reckon half of them have got mobile devices of one sort or another. They're all living in different places. Your app, sure, it's probably not launching to all of them, but it's probably launching to a lot of people at the same time. The minute you press launch and it goes live in the App Store or on Google Play. So you need to understand at least some of these people. So how do you go about doing that? Well, one thing you can do as a tester is you can start thinking about things like using user personas. If you befriend your UX and your design people where you work, you may find they already use things like user personas. These are descriptions of fictional people that are created to represent different user types that might use a particular site or an app or a brand or a product in a similar way. So you want to understand things like user personas. You want to understand user profiling from, for example, applications like Flurry. So being able to put groups of users into particular categories, and then the impact and how those users would actually use your device, or indeed how they actually use the application that you have running. You want to know where to find really good industry statistics. Places like StatCounter, for example, and Mixpanel are great for getting general industry statistics. you'll be the person who understands and keeps an eye on App Store reviews and really looks at how your users are actually the feedback your users are actually giving you. You want to look at things like analytics, again from Flurry, for example, or Fabric, or any other of the embedded analytics programs. And you'll also think about using your users, so perhaps you'll get involved in user testing as well. So you're really bringing all this information back into the team. So that's a little bit of an overview of what you'll want to do. But now let's look at what actually makes a great mobile tester. So what makes you great as a mobile tester, and what ultimately secures your place on the team? What makes you a really good team member? So let's look at some traits of the great, some traits of great mobile testers. Or in fact, these are traits of great testers in general. So you need to be flexible. As I mentioned before, the pace of projects in mobile is very, very fast. So you'll need to be flexible. You'll need to be adaptable. You'll need that great understanding of technology. You'll need to understand the complete mobile technology space and be really excited by it. You'll employ those exploratory approaches to your testing. You'll also, and this is really important, particularly within mobile, where there tends to be a small number of testers per team, maybe only one, and a greater number of developers, you're also there to coach the team on how to deliver good quality. So that does mean you might actually do less testing yourself, but if you're enabling the team to own quality, and you're enabling the team to understand how to own quality, you're doing a very, very valuable job. But when you do your testing, what you're also making sure is that you're giving some great information in your bug reports. So you're making sure that the information you feed back to the developers is of extremely good quality. So let's go through a few and look at some of these in a little bit more detail. So firstly, tech. So you understand your tech. So that doesn't just mean understanding the devices, it means understanding the operating systems as well. So you'll know when the latest updates are coming out because you'll be plugged into the right blogs and the right developer channels that will tell you. You'll understand when new devices are coming out, and you'll understand the impact those devices may have on your apps or on the next iteration of your app. You'll also understand older devices too. You definitely need to know how to use the SDKs, so the Android SDK, for example, Xcode for iOS. So you need to know how to use these. There's some great tools built into these that can really help your testing. You definitely need to be able to build and deploy the software. So you're not a good mobile tester if all you can do is take an APK and then drag and drop it into a particular Android device, for example. Or you can take an iOS device that's given to you by a developer or download something from TestFlight. You're a really good, valuable mobile tester if you can actually build and deploy that software to the devices themselves. You'll think about things that maybe other people don't think about, like battery life, for example, and the impact that a poorly coded application can have on things like battery life. And other operating system specific functionality as well. So Android and iOS, for example, Windows Phone, BlackBerry OS, they all have their own little quirks and their own little different bits of specific functionality. You'll be bringing this information into the team, and that really, really gives really good value. And when it comes to real hardware, you'll know what's different about testing with real hardware. So the fact that you can drop real hardware, you can get it wet, for example, it heats up. And you'll definitely be, if you're using a device and you're testing your application on it and the device is getting hot, you'll definitely be thinking, hang on a minute, there's probably a performance problem here. Why is the processor on the device being used so much? Why is it getting so hot? You'll understand things like maybe you've got some different UI that is only displayed when you use, say, a shaking gesture, for example. You'll understand that kind of tactile nature, that my thumb just falls in the right place and it kind of feels good in my hand sort of nature that makes a good app great. And your testing will also be driven around the fact that things like SIM cards and SD cards, for example, are removable. And there's a whole bunch of other sensors within devices that you'll want to understand and you'll want to use to actually drive your testing. You'll also understand the different operating systems themselves, and you'll understand in the markets that you're going to launch into or that you have an app launched into what different operating systems there are. You'll understand how to get these sorts of stats. These come from a great site called Stat Counter. If you're testing mobile, I definitely recommend you use Stat Counter and the stats that are on there. It's a great wealth of information. You'll also understand, for example, that the latest and greatest isn't normally the best used or the most used. So take this Android example. The team may be focused on the fact that there's Android 5.1 or even Android 5 Lollipop version. That's the latest, greatest. This is what we should be developing for. The reality is most people are on a previous version, and they'll be on a previous version for quite some time. So you need to be bringing this information to your team and making sure that it's understood when the development's taking place. You'll also understand how quickly people upgrade. So out on Android it's quite slow. On iOS it is significantly faster. So you'll know when these new versions are coming out, and you'll do your regression testing beforehand to make sure that an application is working effectively. So this means getting on the developer programs. It means learning how to install and use beta versions of operating systems. So it's extremely important that you do that. You get on those developer programs and use those beta versions. You'll also understand things like the impact of different screen sizes, and you'll understand which devices to pick in order to ensure that you get good coverage. So not everyone in a typical mobile team thinks about this. Quite frequently they just test with whatever they can find, whatever they have access to, maybe their personal device, whatever's on the desk in front of them, or the first thing that comes out of the mobile devices cupboard. So you'll understand this and the impact that has. But you won't always, by default, if you can't cover one of these, just go to your manager and say, can I have another device, please? Please sign me off some budget. Because you'll know about things like open device labs, for example, which are where people who've bought a lot of devices have said, oh, this is a good idea. We've got all these devices. We're not using them. Let's loan them out to people for free. So you can go to somebody's office. As you can see, this is in the UK. There's some open device labs. And you can actually do your testing in their labs using their devices, normally for free, or coffees and donuts for the team or something. So you bring these sorts of services essentially to the team. Again, you provide some really, really good value. As a good mobile tester, you'll definitely want to be using automation. You won't just want to be using automation. That would be a very large mistake. But the regression burden is quite large on mobile, obviously with all these different operating system versions and devices. So you'll definitely want to use automation, whether it's automation you do yourself or automation which you manage on behalf of the team, and that automation is actually coded by developers within the team. But you'll also think very carefully about where's sensible to automate. So you won't just automate the app UI, because that normally produces the most flaky, brittle test. But you'll automate where it makes sense. So it may make sense to do more integration or more unit tests, for example, and build those into your CI pipeline, rather than just trying by default to use, say, like tools like Appium or iOS Driver or Calabash just to automate the UI. You'll need some UI tests, and those three tools that I've just mentioned are all very, very good. But I would definitely encourage you as a good tester to use them sparingly. There's another reason to use those tools sparingly, and that's because most mobile applications are clients of web services, and you can provide some really, really good value to the team as a mobile tester by learning how to test web services. So don't just test the client if you're testing in mobile. So learn about concepts like REST, and learn about using tools like Postman, for example, and learn how to use proxies like Fiddler and the different options available within browser development tools if you're testing a mobile website, because it's often far, far more efficient to get some good test coverage by testing the services that your application is using rather than trying to do everything through the client. It's also often quicker, and it's much easier to employ automation to a web service than it is to the UI of a mobile application. So you can really provide some good value here, and it's far, far more value than if you were just using the application itself. As a good tester, you also want to know why applications get rejected and then build the test strategy for the whole team, not just the test strategy for you, around those reasons. So these are the top 10 most common reasons why applications get rejected from the App Store. So you'll want to understand these sorts of things. You'll want to make your team aware of these sorts of things, and then everybody can use it to focus their efforts. I find it kind of funny that applications are still, quite a lot of applications are still rejected because they contain placeholder text, for example. That's not my own placeholder text on the slide. That's the actual reason why things get rejected. And bugs are not the biggest reason why things get rejected from the App Store. It's normally because people haven't given enough information. But talking of bugs, when you do find a bug, and I'm sure you will find bugs, first thing you do is you get up and you go over and you talk to the developer in question, and you discuss it and you demonstrate it. And if after that it turns out to be a bug, then you raise a bug report. And these are some great questions that you can ask yourself, particularly with mobile, when you're raising a bug report. Have I covered all these areas? Is the information I've put in great? For example, do you have screenshots or a video of the particular issue? You can quite easily make videos of the screen. That's almost like screencasts from mobiles now. You can do it through Android. You can do it through Xcode. You can even do it through Chrome developer tools now. So do you have a screencast or some way that it's really obvious what the issue was? Think about where you were when you saw the issue, if there's a location element to it. Can you repeat the issue on a fresh install? Or what were you doing beforehand? So was there something else you did on that device which may have caused the particular issue? Do you have data? Do you have logs that you could grab from the device using an SDK that you could then include? What device was the device connected to the network? How was it connected? Which mobile operator? Was it over Wi-Fi? And very, very important at the bottom there, what actually was the device? What version of the operating system were you using? All of these are really important questions to ask yourself. So I've spoken about how you do your testing. Let's think now about how you get involved in areas that maybe you wouldn't be quite so likely to in more traditional testing. So, for example, you might work more closely with your users. You may harness your crowd. So you may harness the internal crowd. You may harness other people's crowds through, say, a crowdsourcing company. And harnessing the crowd is a great way of getting involved in areas you wouldn't normally get involved with. So, for example, usability testing that I touched on earlier, that being able to view people in controlled lab conditions using your application and seeing how easy they actually find it, or whether they find particular blockers and problems. Think about setting up internal user groups. So distributing apps via, say, Hockey app or Test Flight, for example, internal distribution platforms, and getting a group internally testing the application before you launch. And you can scale this up. You can think about beta test groups and setting up beta test groups of trusted users that are outside of the company you work for. So think about how as testers you can get involved in this sort of thing. Get involved earlier in the process around usability testing and later in the process around the internal user groups and beta testing, for example. And it's also possible you may get involved very, very much right at the end. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier. So think about user reviews. I mean, treat App Store reviews sometimes with a little piece of salt, because it's very easy for people to leave poor reviews just because they want to leave a poor review and not because there's actually anything wrong. But I love to see these sorts of things when I look in the app stores. So this is not bad reviews per se. What this is people looking at bad reviews, companies, and then companies responding. And the one on the right is great. So there's a problem. There's a really big issue. Would you like to join our beta program? So think as a tester. You might not be leaving this, actually be the person who's actually directly interacting in the app stores, but you want to understand what the app store rating of your application is. And you want to keep an eye on the app store and say to the product owner or your manager, hang on a minute, we're getting some bad reviews here. Somebody might want to step in and respond to these. And imagine if you were the tester who had set the beta program up. So you can pop up and you can say, well, okay, why don't we get them in the beta program for the team? This little project I've been running. I think that'd be great. And last but by no means least, as a good tester, you also know how to monitor the apps in live. So you know, hopefully your application has a monitoring platform built into it, either Fabric or Flurry or Google Analytics, for example. And you can understand all these usage patterns for your particular application. Who's downloading it? How are they using it? What flow do they take through the application? You can use all of this to drive your testing, as well as, frankly, it's quite fascinating stuff. So you can look at where the application is crashing, for example. What sort of load is there? How many sessions do you have? What are the users actually doing? What App Store ratings are there? Bringing all this information into the team, that really, really gives value, and that really helps kind of secure your place on the team as a really, really valuable team member. And this is a screen grab from Fabric, for example. I could stare at this sort of stuff for absolutely hours, and it gets quite hypnotic. But the key thing here is all of this information, be the person who brings this information back into the team. Start to own this sort of stuff, because it's really important, and you could really use it to drive your testing efforts. So, to sum up what you've heard today, firstly, if you get into mobile testing, or you're already in mobile testing, build on what you know. So don't be overawed by mobile testing, because a lot of the skills are common, and lots more can be learnt, and they can be learnt quite easily. So how to use SDKs, for example, and how to get a better understanding of users and better understanding of the industry itself. And as a great mobile tester, you're also involved earlier in the development process, perhaps at design review stage and prototyping, and hopefully later as well in beta tests, for example, and looking at app stores. You want to become the customer advocate for your team. So you'll want to be the person who understands the platforms and devices and how people are using a particular application or a mobile website. You'll definitely want to be a mobile tech obsessive. So you'll want to be the person who's excited by devices and OS versions and what's being updated, what's coming next, why is it cool, what can we do with this in the team, how can we make our application better. You'll want to be able to test using simulators themselves. You'll definitely want to be able to test and understand real devices. I strongly urge you to understand more about web services if you don't already, and you'll want to test using users as well. So usability testing and internal and external alpha and beta tests. You'll understand that cost of automation, and you'll understand where you get the most value from employing automation, and it's not just through the UI. And you'll do a lot of manual testing, or you'll enable your team to do a lot of manual testing, but you'll use an exploratory approach. As mobile device projects, they're often very short, and therefore you need a flexible, exploratory approach to your manual test effort. And really, it's all about this. So a good tester, and this doesn't just apply to mobile, it applies across the board, a good tester enables a team to take responsibility for quality. A good tester helps the team to own its quality. And really, that's how you provide value, and that's how you secure your place on a mobile team. So thanks everyone for listening, and now's a good time to take some questions, Ronan.
Great. Thanks very much, Stephen. That was a very interesting webinar. I think you should rename it Mobile Testing 101, because I don't think there's any part of mobile testing that you haven't covered there. So I thought it was very interesting for someone that uses a lot of apps and always complains on the play about, I always leave feedback saying these apps are terrible. Now I know I'm talking to someone like you. So next time I'll consider someone like yourself when I'm giving out about certain apps. Folks, I just want to mention before we take one or two questions, Stephen's going to be presenting at EuroSTAR this year. So on the Wednesday of EuroSTAR, it's November 2nd to 5th, it's in Maastricht in the Netherlands. He'll be talking about, his talk will be about, as you can see the title there, Why I Lost My Job as a Test Manager and What I Learned as a Result. and that's on Wednesday 4th. And then as part of our brand new event on Friday the 6th, it's the deep dive, which I'll go into more detail later. He's talking about mobile. His title talk is Mobile Users Are Different. So 2 talks to catch, Stephen. If you enjoyed the session today, and I'm sure you did as much as I did. Just to mention, folks, as well, tomorrow at 2 p.m. same time, British Standard Time, we have a webinar presented by John Hager from Grand Software Testing of the USA, and his webinar is on mobile app test attacks. So that's the same time again here tomorrow. And if you want to register for that, you can do so by just going to testhuddle.com/mobile, and that's the easiest way for you to register. As well as that, for those of you that were attending today, we're offering 15% off. It's a discount code for EuroSTAR this year. So as I mentioned, it's in Maastricht. It's on November 2nd to 5th. And if you use the code MWS15, you have until June 30th to get 15% off. It should be a very good conference this year. It's a mix of everything, workshops, tutorial sessions, and there's a few different sessions in there as well. Something a bit different. So check out the program anyway on the EuroSTAR website, and you get more of an idea of what it's all about. And finally, I'll just mention the mobile deep dive. So this is a special Friday only event. The conference itself runs from Monday to Thursday, and this year we've added an extra day. So it means you don't have to go home on the Friday. You can stay around for the mobile deep dive session. And as you can see, we have 3 keynotes and we'll have 8 track sessions. So if you are into mobile testing, then this is the day for you. As well as that, if you're attending EuroSTAR, you'll get a 50% discount on registration. So thanks very much again, Stephen, for your webinar. And I have two questions we're going to take here now. The first one for you is someone asks what's the most important thing a tester can do to be a great mobile team member?
That's an interesting one. I think it comes down to that last slide. So it comes down to being able to enable the team to own its quality. So I think it's very much when you're a mobile tester, you may well be the only tester in the team, and so you need to be the person who's really thinking about the customer and really thinking about the impact of the team's deliverables on the customer, and kind of spreading that information throughout the team. So there's lots of ways you can do that, and a lot of places you can learn from. And what I'll try and do, I'll put some stuff into Test Huddle on the thread in Test Huddle, give people some places to go and look.
Great. Thanks very much. Actually, I'll just share that link again now. If anyone's interested, it's there in the chat in your bottom right-hand screen on the GoToWebinar panel. That's the follow link to the discussion. As Steve mentioned, that's where you can ask a few more questions. We'll take one more here live, and then we'll move over to Test Huddle. And the second question for you, Stephen, is how do I find out more about mobile users and become my team's customer advocate?
Yes. Yeah, there's lots of really good places to do that. I mean, the first one to do, if you already have an application out there, then find the people within the company that you work for that actually have that more direct link. So I've traditionally found it tends to be people working in UX tend to do more usability testing, for example, and so they tend to understand much more about the users themselves. But also, you can understand a huge amount about the users by looking at your monitoring, for example, and if you've got tools like Fabric or Flurry or Google Analytics, some analytics tools embedded in there, then you can understand exactly how people are using your particular application. And so, taking that all together, it can give you that kind of nice rounded picture. Now, if you're launching something brand new, then what you tend to need to do is to look at similar applications and then either look at how those similar applications could be used, or to take industry kind of standard statistics. So sites like StatCounter, for example, and Mixpanel, and and Google have a site too. They aggregate industry statistics, and they can give you an idea of the different operating systems and devices and screen sizes and so on that are being used in a particular territory. So provided you know where you're launching, and if you've got an idea of what the sort of target age group you're after is as well, you can use those sites to get some more general information.
Okay, that's great, Stephen. Thanks very much. Folks, I just realized I had a problem there that you didn't actually see my screen when I was mentioning those brief slides. So I just quickly run through them again. John Hager, as I said, presenting tomorrow. And then the code again here. It's always good to have a visual reminder rather than audio reminder as well. So the code there, if you want to get 15% off EuroSTAR attendance this year, is MWS15, and that's the code. And as I mentioned, Deep Dive Friday is on the Friday of EuroSTAR this year. And finally, discussion on Tesla.com. So that's it, folks. Thanks very much for attending, and thank you, Stephen, for presenting. And we'll see you over on Tesla.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Take care. See you, everyone.